Okay, right. Well, we'll have a bit of a chat.
Yeah.
No, fine. Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Writing Life. Our guest today is Anne Enright, one of the leading writers of her generation among Irish writers. Anne's work is distinguished by those values and qualities that have shone through Irish writing over the years. Her inimitable wit, her formal innovation, her stylistic daring, and a general sense of judicious disorderliness, I would say, in her work. So it's a pleasure to have.
Hi, how you doing?
I should say, but I haven't, of course, but I should say that Anne has written a volume of short stories. She's published 3 novels and a work of nonfiction. She's also the recipient of the Rooney Prize, the Royal Society of Literature Encore Prize, and the Davy Byrnes Short Story Award. So, welcome, Anne.
Thank you.
You're a Dubliner.
I am.
And you were growing up in Dublin when the city was going through a number of changes.
Yeah.
And this has been something that you noted, I think, in your work.
Yeah, the Dublin of my childhood was the sort of banal suburbs. It wasn't a very interesting historical centre of the city. And it was a kind of mixed population of people coming in from the country, starting up their families, buying, little semi-detached houses. I'm in a sort of camp way, I really like housing estates, and I write a lot about housing estates, and these are the places where my characters live and where they come from. And it's not an Irish landscape. You know, a French photographer was taking Irish writers, and he had someone against the mountain, someone against the sea, and I said, I want to be in a housing estate, and he went, right, okay. It didn't make the kind of picture that French people thought Ireland was made of.
Yeah, our people generally would think, because they still have this blood and soil kind of idea of Ireland.
Well, it is strange that even though we're in the burbs, there is still blood and soil running through Irish families and Irish life in the suburbs.
Yeah.
And my generation was quite a transitional one. We grew up in Catholic Ireland, and we're now living in boomtown Ireland, where the Catholic certainties have been blown away. So we're the generation exactly where it changed, and we are the generation who moved the change or made the change.
Yeah, so you're the generation between the old rigidities and an openness, sometimes the point of which is not necessarily clear.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that about you necessarily, but certainly it's something that you pick up on for your characters.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in Irish society now, the openness, it is clear it's all about money, so we have a great excuse for making money, so it doesn't matter, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter, we can get divorced, we can do all sorts of, we can live our lives whatever way, because of course it's about money, but actually the money came just in the last 10 years, and the change has happened before then.
But there's no kind of long-term view necessarily, as there once was, you know, that you could kind of stick with a pattern and that would see you through. I was struck in reading What Are You Like with the comment that Bertz makes about his sister, for example, and he notices the sister comes around to visit him on Christmas time, and he notices that she's a bit boozed, and that this is an eye-opener to him. He says 20 years ago we would never have anything like that.
My mother was 45 before she crossed the threshold of a pub. I mean, we think of the drinking Irish, but actually they were very much the abstinent Irish as well.
Oh, well, sure. I mean, every story has its opposite, as your own work picks up on.
She wouldn't, she has a drink every Christmas Day, and that's it. That's how Irish she is.
And Bertz's wife, listening to the radio, can't recognize the country that's being represented in one of the in one of the talk shows. That's another thing, you know, that it's a society of victims according to specific, you know, a particular
that talk
kind
show
of
phenomenon was amazing in the 70s and 80s. There was this sort of secret life on the radio that the country was talking to itself endlessly on the radio and saying, this is what happened in my childhood and whatever. And that gradually chipped away at all the institutions like the Catholic Church. And
well, this was a public confession in a certain way.
It was amazing. It was riveting. It was sort of Oprah, but with much more political, actually.
Absolutely, yeah, and coming from need rather than coming from opportunism, which is
and also the confessional business of the radio. You know that you actually, you know, you might think that your neighbours wouldn't know that it was you. You know, it's not like appearing on television.
Exactly, yeah.
Wonderful medium.
So you went to Trinity.
I did.
And then you went to the University of East Anglia, to the very renowned writing program that they have there, the postgraduate writing program. And what was that like for you?
Well, I didn't. I got a bit of money, and it's a small amount of money, and offered by the university. I was delighted to get it, and I had like £19 a week or something amazingly small to live on, but it was better than nothing, and I could be a writer for a year. Yeah. I lived in this shoebox of a student room, and tried to write, and failed. Sort of endlessly until 4 in the morning every morning. And then I would get up.
You failed in the classes?
No, I went to the classes and I did all of that thing, but I was leading a sort of quite a dark life in front of the typewriter permanently. And so it wasn't very enjoyable, and I found it very lonely. I had been abroad before and at school abroad before, but I found the English, or maybe the bunch of English people I was with, very quiet and slightly suspicious, and you know, they didn't go out at night or anything like that.
Well, the campus, I think, is kind of outside of the town, and Norwich itself is not a known centre of vibrancy.
No, it's a very white town.
Yeah.
It's a very quiet white town in England. Yeah.
So it must have been interesting to make the transition between a capital city, after all, Dublin, and this provincial outpost.
Actually, it was, you know, it was in the middle of the 80s, and we thought that we were all very modern and forward-looking, but to be Irish in England at that stage was still a little bit to be dirty, drunk and poor, you know. So you'd come along and you'd say something quite witty, and they say, well, of course she's witty, she's Irish. And you go, well, and then you'd write something, you say, well, of course it's written this way or that way because you're Irish. And I was thinking, other Irish people don't write like this, you know. It actually has to be looked at on its own terms.
Yes,
but they thought I was a sort of cultural object rather than a person who was working like they were, you know, and found my work very strange. So it was an estranging year, and it was important to me as a writer, though, because it was a year where I said, I am a writer. And at the end of that year, I came home and immediately started writing work that was published. But it's a very salient, for people who want to write, you fail and 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 then you fail some more and you fail and then you fail better.
Fail better, as Mr. Beckett has said. But it must have been interesting, though, to have a kind of a structure provided by the faculty, and there were definitely people reading what you were producing, and, you know, that gave a certain legitimacy, as it were, to what you were undertaking.
You live in your head anyway. Yeah. You live very much in your head when you're writing. But it was like when you read out your work, the silence afterwards is different. And it was just experiencing that different silence and saying what it was like. And then women in particular, I think, often write from inside themselves. They don't have an outside view. Sort of experience it. I always write somehow organically. I smell my way around a story. I don't say, oh, I'm going to build this like, you know, blocks and put it, you know. I have to wait, and I have to call it in. I have to grow it, you know, like mold in a dish. It's awful, actually, as a process. And I wish I was that kind of writer who said, I'm going to write a 3-part book in which this, and this happens. But I don't.
But so you are more or less listening to it as it arrives in your mind.
I suppose.
Yeah. Does this actually influence the form of your work, where there are a number of episodes and a number of shortish takes which reflect and interact with one another?
Yeah, I mean, I like to deal in facets, you know.
Yes.
That a subject is somehow unapproachable, so it throws these lights around like a disco ball, and I'm just trying to catch them, you know.
Yeah.
But to actually describe what is in the center of the disco ball is what I'm trying, you know, is not going to be possible.
Right.
I think there is a sort of gap in the middle of a lot of books, an absence or a darkness, an indescribable something, and often it's filled, you know, in this, you know, at a certain stage, people would fill it with that kind of plot, and you know, a Victorian secrets plot or a modern secrets plot.
Yes.
But I like to realize that it's not necessarily knowable what's at the center of it all.
Well, it's not necessarily knowable, but on the other hand, to the degree that it's not knowable, that engages the reader.
Yeah.
Of course, because then the reader can, as it were, complete in his or her
Yeah.
own way what they find necessary to know.
It's sort of, you're
know.
setting up a series of resonances. You're just throwing it out and seeing. It's like striking a chord, maybe, seeing how the notes play together, you know.
Right, yeah.
I have a terrible problem with chronology, because I don't see my life as happening one day at a time.
Yeah.
It's like one thing, it's not that I live in a permanent state of déjà vu, but I kind of feel that there are things that happen almost out of time, that we don't live chronologically, that somehow we're 6 again. And then, you know, I'm not explaining this very well, but that's how I experience life.
But I think too that some of your characters can enter, as it were, moments which have a greater endurance and a greater kind of weight for them than you know, months or months of their lives. You know? And I think that often the way your books are structured is not necessarily chronological.
I set things against each other just to see. I mean, What Do You Like, which is my second novel, is about identical twins, and I just set their lives against each other. But there is a sort of secret architecture to the book about how their brains work, for example. You know, this sort of slight things, how they're interested in space. So there are threads that were, so I would say one at the age of 6 and the other at the age of 12, and they just, you know, but there are resonances between them that structure it. Ultimately, structure the book ultimately.
And which give them a presence as identical twins.
Yeah.
While at the same time wondering about what constitutes identity exactly.
It is the big question of that book.
And it's a big question for them. So in that way, and as much as it is a question, the reader can, you know, has something to go on.
I know, but I love those identical twins. They do it in Minneapolis, St. Paul, in the Twin City. There's a big twin study thing, and they search for twins who've grown up apart, and they use the same brand of toothpaste. You know, oh, you're genetically programmed to use the same brand of toothpaste. How utterly banal is this? Or they all wear, they wear cream suit with brown piping on the side. Or they were making an apple pie at the same time. And you think, this is utterly, utterly banal. But there must be some poetry to our genetics, you know. And that was what I was trying to explore as well.
Yes, yeah. Now, you did some acting as well, I think.
I did, for a limited time.
And do you think that had an influence on your writing at all?
I still tend to act it out as I'm writing it, and do the voices in my head.
Yeah.
And I like a nice sort of sprung rhythm. I like a spoken sort of prose.
Yes.
But the voices do change from book to book. It is a different voice each book. You know?
Yeah, and even within characters, you're able to give them different voices for different occasions, you know, and different tonalities and different registers and so on.
Yeah.
Which makes them fuller as characters, of course. That they're not predictable because you don't necessarily know the next thing that they're going to say or that they're going to
neither do they.
consider.
Neither do I, actually, most of the
No,
time.
well, of course. I mean, that's part of the freedom of your writing.
Yeah.
You know.
You know when you're really cooking when you're writing, if you are surprised and delighted by what happens, that you didn't know that was going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. So you see these connections that you were talking about before, that they, you know, they're sprung on you.
Yeah.
But
I wish I knew what was going to happen in this book. I'm trying to finish and I'm waiting for the surprise. I just need just one more turn, and then it'll be done. You know.
Yeah. But one of the things I also thought about your acting background, maybe that influenced some of the aspects of your work, is you know, you have an interest in wardrobe, and you have an interest in cosmetic, and an interest in how people represent themselves for the world to consume, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, Alice Monroe does great clothes. That's one of the things she's good at, and she does good lipstick, and she does. You say, yeah,
she does
that's
good lipstick. Yeah.
She does, you know.
This is a high critical accolade.
Yeah, it is. It is, and she does the sadness of all of that.
Yes,
as well.
yes.
And I love
it's kind
that
of a
as well.
circus, you know, the makeup, you know, for the clown to look happy, as it were, sometimes.
Yeah, and also her characters have a very strong inner life, and then they walk down the street, so that's interesting.
Yeah.
So they have to walk down the street, they have to wear their lipstick, and they have to, you know, and that's
Well,
something
they can't
I'm very
walk down the
interested in.
street unless they have their lipstick.
Yeah.
To some extent, or at least that's what they think.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I always, I mean, Alice Monroe is herself a very well presented person. She dresses very nicely, and it's obviously important to her. I find the whole business of how you can structure, especially a female identity, very problematic. I mean, what are you supposed to look like?
Yeah.
You know,
What are you like?
What are you like? You know, are you
Yeah.
going to go blonde? I mean, what's that for? And what difference does that make? And but you're asked these questions all the time, all the time.
It's as if you're. I mean, this is a theatrical thing, I suppose. Maybe, you know, that you're playing to some audience that you suspect might be out there.
Well, yeah, but more than that, again, it's more that you live more permanently without the audience and are always frightened by the fact that they exist, that you'd forgotten they were there.
Okay.
You know.
Yeah.
So. And then you realise the mask. You say, "Oh no, that's the mask."
Yeah.
But the rest of the time, you're quite happy.
What are the ways in which this thinking influenced your approach to your first novel, The Wig My Father Wore, where the wig is a significant marker of identity?
Yeah, the father has a sort of a hamster on his head, and. I look a lot at men who wear toupees and wigs, even still, and think, what is the fantasy that sustains them? How do they think that this is not, you know, but it's a very particular sort of clinical narcissism that they have, which the father doesn't necessarily have. The father doesn't really, the wig, the narrator works in television, and the wig is, I was really interested in what's real and fake. Television is putting real people in a fake situation. Yeah. And, you know, in the Oprah model, using real lives and real events and just eating them. Actually, the television just eats them. And in this very high fake medium. Yeah. So that collision was really interesting to me. And it was like the wig is like real hair, somebody's real hair, made into this fake thing that's slapped on his head. So.
But the wig comes home, as it were, at the same time as the TV for the family to watch the moon landing in 1969. Yeah. And I thought that was a fascinating interplay about seeing and being seen.
My mother, the night they landed on the moon, would not come in to watch the telly. She said, "Sure, I can see the moon here through the kitchen window."
Oh, my goodness, is that right?
Which I put in a story once. And I was enormously taken by this idea that the whole world was watching this event that was actually also in some way visible, if only you could see it on the moon. Yes. And that was, I don't know what age I was, 6 or 8 or 6. Yeah. And that was just the right age for that sort of abstract delight. Yeah. I loved that. Yeah. It's a great thing, the moon landing. course, it was all fake. We know that now. It was faked up. Why was there no picture of the guy? You know, which way? You know?
Yeah, it all happened in the desert in New Mexico.
It did.
Yeah,
It did.
yeah,
It did.
yeah.
Near Roswell.
Okay. One of the things that struck me is in the first paragraph of the first story in your first book,
Yes.
there's this character, Kathy,
Yes.
about whom you write, she loved corners, surprises, changes of light. And I think that there's something about them, the way in which you present characters has this unpredictability about them, and that they're capable of turning and capable of being alerted.
You know, the Ireland I grew up in had very low expectations.
Yeah.
I remember I was doing a radio program for the BBC. This producer brought me to Senegal, and I was in the middle of Dakar in Africa, and I said, "My God, do you ever wonder at the way your life turned out here?" I mean, there I was with the BBC in Africa. I had never thought that this would happen. And he said, "No."
Really?
I thought, well, that was a very dry way to live. That he wasn't surprised
Was
or
this
amazed.
an English person?
No, he was a Canadian, actually.
Really?
Yeah, but no, he wasn't surprised. This was what he expected in life, to do this sort of thing. And I'm constantly surprised that I might be sitting in, for example, you know, Mississippi or Colombia.
Yeah.
You know, doing a reading to people I've never met. It's really surprising.
Yeah.
Anyway, the woman in the story sold handbags and she's based on a character that when I was a child, we knew a woman, my mother knew a woman who worked at the handbag counter in Cleary's in the centre of Dublin. And we thought this was amazing and exotic. And her story was that a man walked up to her and married her and took her off to Florida, where she had a barbecue in the backyard and orange trees growing in the backyard. And, you know, my maiden aunts got together in a bundle and they said she wasn't happy. It was probably a mistake. So I set out to write this wonderful story about a woman who a man walks up to the counter and sweeps her away. Yeah. But in fact, as it turned out, because the description of the bags was so fetishistic, I realised that I should make her gay, that she was in some way gay. Yeah. So it's a woman who walks up to her counter and sweeps her away. And that was her surprise. Yes. How surprising is that? Yeah. That's surprising. Yeah. Oh, God. You know, that's... Anyway, she also lived at a time, or as a kind of person who doesn't deal in the kind of labels that we put on our sexuality, you know. So she doesn't say she's gay. I mean, it's not a story about a gay woman. It's about a woman at a handbag counter who falls in love with a woman who walks up to her counter. Yeah, and is a bit surprised by it. And she simply falls in love with the woman. It's not as if they go off and they shack up or any of that. No, you know, it's just this kind of exactly. Yeah. And she's married. Yeah. Although I thought that was a very interesting part of the story, that she gets married, but I mean the marriage is disposed of in about 3 lines or so. Well, you see, it's all about people coming up to the handbag counter and wondering what sort of handbag is them. I mean, what a bizarre question is that? What handbag is me, right? So they're choosing who they are.
But she's very good at assisting them in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, she's. As often, she wouldn't be able to buy a handbag herself. She carries everything in one pocket or the other, you know.
So what is she like,
well, exactly.
So to speak? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And as a result of this encounter with the desired person, her life becomes a different kind of entity.
Yeah, and she takes any old bag, basically.
Yeah.
After that, she just, you know, she starts to sleep around. It's the last.
It's the last line of the story.
So it's all about choice.
Yes.
I got a job in television when I was young, and I don't know, we didn't really do money in our family, and so I had money. And then we don't really do objects either, you know. Yeah. So what you needed, and what all of Ireland needed, was a gay friend, a gay male friend who said,
who knew,
yes. And he said, no, you know, it's all in the eyes, or whatever. And so, you know, Ireland was very new to shopping. Now we do nothing else, it's all shopping.
Yeah, people even come over here.
They
to
do.
New York
Load
by
up.
the plane load
Yeah. Straight to
shop.
Fifth Avenue
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
home again.
yeah. But I think though that although Kathy is choosing, she's choosing something which is more complicated.
Uh-huh.
And I think that one of the things that I found about your characters, and your women characters in particular, is that they enter into more complicated versions of themselves, and they can't avert
Yeah.
more complicated or less preconditioned versions of themselves. And I was thinking of that line in Brian Friel's translations. Confusion is not an ignoble condition, one of the characters said.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if that is something that you believe as well.
Well, sort of bewildered is the best way to be.
Yeah.
The world does not make sense. And it's
Yeah.
great to have a story for it and say, this is who I am, this is where I'm going, this is what the world is, this is how objects cohere around me, this is how I live in my house, and all of that sort of thing. But you're wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
You're wrong.
Yeah.
This is...
Because you're going to be found out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was thinking of that in relation to what you were saying about being a member of a transitional generation.
Yeah.
But the generation that you were describing is a generation which is more open to possibilities.
Yes.
You know, maybe the tendency is to hide in money. You know, in a way that people used to hide in the church long ago. You know, and that's their discipline, and that's their the form that they have to inhabit.
Yeah.
But it's much more difficult to do that, you know, in material terms than it used to be in a kind of patriarchal organization like the church.
It's very hard. It's very hard in the previous generation. You can't actually blame them. And the absence of money was as strong as the presence of money is now.
Yes.
Because they didn't have choices.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you live in a world without contraception, you're going to have 5 children. You know, you don't have a choice and say, well, you can, but it's very hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very hard.
Well, we're about to wrap up here, but I would just like to cite something that Aidan Matthews wrote about your work, which I think is very apropos. And he said about your first book of stories that the stories restore us to the strangeness of the lives we follow, beneath the surface of the lives we lead. And I think that kind of double view that you have in your work is extremely telling and fertile and creates the kind of openness that you were talking about.
This has been very educational for me too, George. Thank you. I go home now.
That's right.
And write more open books.
You've been given homework.
I have, yeah.
Right. Well, it's been a great pleasure talking to Anne Enright. Thank you very much, Anne.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for tuning into this edition of The Writing Life.